When I married Richard, I believed I was stepping into a second chance at happiness. He was gentle, composed, and the kind of man who looked you in the eyes when he spoke, as if each word he offered you held weight. A year into our marriage, we moved into a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. It was the kind of place where birdsong replaced traffic and routine had a comforting rhythm, but what I hadn't anticipated was Luke, Richard's son from his first marriage. Luke was 17 when I met him, tall, angular, and quiet, with the kind of watchful gaze that made you feel as though you were being studied rather than seen. He visited us on weekends at first, and later, when his mother took a job overseas, he moved in permanently. At first, we barely spoke. He was polite but distant, as if he'd built a wall years before I arrived and had no interest in letting anyone through. Still, I tried. I asked about his classes, his music, even sat through a torturously long sci-fi movie just to have something to talk about with him afterward. He rarely smiled, but when he did, those rare, flickering smiles, I felt as though I'd cracked something sacred. Richard, meanwhile, was often away for work. Consulting, he called it, long hours, longer trips. I told myself it was fine. I had Luke to look after, and a home to build. But over time, something shifted. It started small. A shared laugh over a badly cooked dinner. A long conversation on the porch about his dreams of studying architecture. A moment where our hands brushed while reaching for the same book on the shelf, and neither of us moved away too quickly. I remember one evening clearly, late autumn, the air thick with the scent of dry leaves. I found Luke sketching in the backyard, his pencil moving swiftly over a pad balanced on his knee. When he saw me, he didn't hide the drawing. It was of the house. Our house. But the way he'd drawn it, softer edges, light pouring from the windows, it looked like a memory, not a structure. I like it here, he said quietly, eyes still on the page. It feels different now. I didn't ask what he meant by different. I didn't have to. I felt it too, a shift beneath the surface, subtle but undeniable. We weren't doing anything wrong. Not really. But something about the way he looked at me lingered longer than it should have. And something in me, perhaps loneliness, perhaps vanity, stirred in response. I told myself it was just adjustment. A boy missing his mother. A woman trying to make a home. But that night, as I lay beside my husband, listening to the silence that stretched between us, I couldn't stop replaying the way Luke had said different. It was the first time I questioned what kind of family we were really becoming. It wasn't love, not in the way we define it between adults. But there was something there, quiet and persistent, like a shadow that only became visible when the light hit at the wrong angle. Luke started lingering. After dinner, he'd hover in the kitchen, drying dishes slowly while asking about my past, my dreams before I married his father, the music I listened to when I was his age, the places I wished I had gone. These weren't the usual teenage curiosities. They were searching questions, laced with attention and interest that felt too intense for a boy and his stepmother. One afternoon, I found myself dressing more carefully. Nothing provocative, nothing deliberate, but I paused longer at the mirror, chose the blouse that brought out the green in my eyes. I told myself it was routine. I didn't believe that Richard, increasingly consumed by work, barely noticed. He'd come home late, exhausted, sometimes forgetting even to ask how my day had been. He didn't see the way Luke and I had developed a kind of rhythm, how our conversations flowed, unbroken and easy, in contrast to the quiet strain that had grown between my husband and me. Luke was changing, too. He began taking care of little things, washing my car, leaving my favorite tea in the cabinet, fixing the wobbly porch chair without being asked. Once, when a storm knocked out the power, we lit candles and played cards in the living room. I remember the way the firelight danced in his eyes, how he laughed, genuinely, freely, and how warm it felt to be seen, really seen, but the lines were thinning, and I felt it came to a head one evening when I returned home from the grocery store. I'd forgotten my umbrella, and the rain had soaked through my coat. As I stepped into the house, shivering, Luke appeared with a towel, already walking toward me. He wrapped it around my shoulders with a care that was too tender, too practiced. His hand lingered for a second too long. Our eyes met, not by accident, not in passing, but with awareness that I stepped back first. "Thank you," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "I'm fine." He nodded but didn't speak. That silence was heavier than words. In it, everything we weren't supposed to feel, and everything we were too afraid to name, took shape. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Richard, his steady breath rising and falling beside me, while guilt gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. I hadn't done anything wrong. Not really. But I had allowed something to grow, something I wasn't sure I could still control, and worse, I wasn't sure I wanted to. As dawn crept through the curtains, I knew something had to change. But I also knew that change often arrives too late to prevent damage, only in time to mark its cost. The tension in the house became a quiet, living thing, always there, slinking around corners, settling into conversations that faltered too quickly. I tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy, throwing myself into routines, planning weekend dinners, suggesting movie nights. But Richard had grown distant, distracted. When he looked at me, it was with the eyes of a man who suspected something was off but hadn't yet decided whether to ask. Then came the night everything cracked. It was a Friday. We'd just finished dinner, a strained affair punctuated by silverware scraping against plates and Luke offering clipped answers to his father's questions. Richard, clearly irritated by the boy's attitude, pressed harder. He brought up Luke's slipping grades, his attitude, his late-night phone calls. "I'm not a child," Luke snapped, standing up so suddenly his chair scraped the floor. "No," Richard said, his voice cold. "You're acting like someone who thinks the rules don't apply to him." Luke's jaw tightened. "Maybe the rules don't make sense anymore." He stormed out before anyone could respond, slamming the door so hard it rattled the kitchen windows. Without thinking, I followed. Outside, the evening air was heavy with the scent of impending rain. I found him at the edge of the backyard, shoulders hunched, hands jammed in his jacket pockets. For a moment, I considered going back inside. "But I didn't." "You didn't have to defend me," he muttered without turning around. "I wasn't," I said softly. "I just didn't want things to get worse." He looked at me then, really looked. And there was something raw in his eyes. They already are. The wind picked up, and for a second, we stood in silence, suspended between right and wrong. And then, too quickly, too recklessly, he said it. "I think I'm in love with you." My breath caught. I should have stopped him, should have walked away. But I froze. "You're not," I whispered. "You're just confused." "I'm not," he insisted. "You're the only person who listens. Who sees me. I know how wrong this is. But I can't help it." And I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that he had said it, or the fact that some buried part of me had been waiting to hear it that I didn't answer. I just turned and walked back toward the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. What I didn't see was Richard standing at the upstairs window, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the two figures in the dark yard below. When I stepped back inside, he was sitting at the dining table, untouched wine glass before him, watching the door. "Anything I should know?" he asked, voice level but laced with suspicion that I shook my head too quickly. Just calming him down. He didn't argue. But his silence afterward spoke volumes, and I knew, then, the damage wasn't something we could simply pretend away. It had already taken root. And now, it was beginning to bloom. The days that followed were drenched in silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, humming quiet of something fractured, not quite broken, but no longer whole. Richard didn't confront me, not directly. But I saw it in his eyes, the way he studied my words for hidden meanings, the pauses before his replies. Suspicion had taken root, and trust was slipping through the cracks like water through cupped hands. Luke avoided me. Whether out of shame or confusion, I didn't know. He left early for school, returned late, and stayed locked in his room. The weight of his confession hung between us like fog, too thick to ignore, too delicate to confront without shattering what remained of our fragile household. One morning, I found a note tucked beneath my favorite mug. It was from Luke, handwritten, careful, a mix of boyish scrawl and emotional restraint. I'm sorry. I never meant to ruin anything. I'm leaving for a while. Staying with Mom. Please don't blame yourself. I just need space. Luke. I read it twice, then again, feeling something in me unravel. Relief, perhaps. Or sadness. Maybe both. That I placed the note back where I found it and spent the rest of the day in stillness, wandering the rooms of the house like a guest, not a wife or a stepmother, but a woman lost in her own life. That evening, Richard finally spoke. I saw the way he looked at you, he said, not accusing, just tired. I think I've been ignoring a lot of things. Maybe we both have. I didn't defend myself. I couldn't. I never crossed a line, I said quietly, but you let it blur. He replied that he wasn't angry. That would have been easier to absorb. Instead, his disappointment was like a mirror, showing me not what I had done, but what I had allowed to happen in the spaces I chose not to fill. 2 weeks later, I packed a small suitcase and left. No drama. No explosive fights. Just a quiet understanding that we had reached the edge of something we could no longer repair. That I moved into a modest apartment downtown. A place with creaky floors and large windows, where the light felt honest and nothing reminded me of what had been. Sometimes I catch myself wondering about Luke, whether he still draws, whether he regrets speaking those words, or if they haunt him like they do me, but I don't reach out. Some silences are meant to be honored. In the end, this isn't a story about forbidden love. It's about neglect, the slow erosion of boundaries when emotional needs go unspoken and unmet. It's about the consequences of looking away when you should have looked inward, and maybe, just maybe, it's about learning that some mistakes don't define you, but they do demand that you live differently because of them.